gentlemen, welcome to violence, the word and the act. While violence cloaks itself in a plethora of disguises, its favorite mantle still remains sex.
Hello, welcome back to Desperate Living. Now it's time for another of our occasional roundups of newly obtained Blu-rays, DVDs, UHDs, whatever discs come our way. Today we're going to look at, I say new releases, new-ish releases. Some of these are a good few months old by this point, but you know, it takes a little while for things to arrive and for a decent pile of titles to emerge. But we'll be looking at a few classic titles, talking about the films, talking about their backgrounds, and why you should own these movies. And I have to say that of everything here, there's nothing that you shouldn't own. So let's begin with a collection of titles from 88, always reliable, and here we begin with Island of Terror, classic 1966 film. As you can see, nice little slip cover, double-sided sleeve, features the original artwork. As ever, I'll flip these over. You'll note that I've already taken the shrink wrapping off all these because I know that it upsets a few people when I do it wrong. That's fantastic. Surprisingly, Island of Terror now rated PG, which is pretty unusual for a horror film, even for an old mid-60s horror film. And there's certainly a few gory and unsettling bits in here, so obviously hit the BBFC on a good day. Now this and its companion piece, Night of the Big Heat, are both movies that have an audio commentary by yours truly, so I'll state that up front. But obviously I wouldn't have done the audio commentaries in the first place if I didn't think that these films were worthy movies. So when I recommend these films, it's not because I have product to sell. It's clearly because these are both interesting films. Both movies from Planet Productions, who in the mid-60s were one of those kind of alternative indies who came along and were briefly seen as rivals to Hammer and Amicus. I think at that point anyone who made more than a couple of horror films was viewed in that light. Planet made a handful of films, but they specifically made 3 horror films, one gothic horror and these 2 titles which are both effectively more science fiction. Their other release, which hasn't come out through 88 as far as I'm aware, sadly, I think is one of their most interesting, and I have the poster here. It's not Curse of the Fly, it's the second feature, Devils of Darkness. This is an unusual American poster, actually not a one sheet. You can see it's a kind of odd shape. I got a couple of these weird card posters in my collection. But yeah, Devils of Darkness, directed by Lance Comfort, is an interesting kind of Hammer-esque gothic. But for these other 2 films, they actually had a Hammer director, Terence Fisher, who directed both movies. And yeah, the films themselves are not remotely related to Hammer other than by the presence of Peter Cushing in both films, Christopher Lee in Night of the Big Heat. Island of Terror, of course, is the film about the giant radioactive monsters, the silicates, that appear on a small island and suck the bones out of the living. If you haven't seen it, it's a lot of fun. It's not got the best reputation, but I've always enjoyed this movie. Scared the willies out of me when I was a little kid, and I've loved it ever since. Great performances from Edward Judd, who was at this point on a kind of, what would we call it, a bit of a career slide into making low budget science fiction exploitation movies that probably weren't the ones that he wanted. Peter Cushing is on good form too, even though he feels a little bit crowbarred into the plot. I do think that maybe the better of the two films, although I wouldn't have said this some years ago, is Night of the Big Heat, a much more interesting film about unseen, maybe unseeable alien invaders. Perhaps not invaders, that's maybe the wrong word. They're just an alien presence that lands, again, on in a small location and just raises the temperature, causing a great deal of sweatiness and heightened passions, shall we say. Again, good cast. Lee and Cushing, particularly Cushing, with they're kind of supporting characters. In fact, the lead role of the film really is Patrick Allen, who was also made the Body Stealers that we discussed in a previous video around the same time as this film. Another great cast as well. Some really interesting supporting players in this film, and yeah, it's got a real intensity and a real darkness to it that I think is quite interesting. The kind of thing that you didn't really get in movies of the time, horror movies of the time, should I say. This was probably just on the verge of horror's big turn in 1968, so it's a 1967 film. So you can see that, maybe that shift is slightly underway. But yeah, there's a nice booklet here, text by Barry Forshaw. Is text by anybody else, or is that it? That'll be it, yeah. Just Barry Forshaw, nice little Planet Productions. Planet were an interesting company, maybe let themselves down a little bit by trying too hard to be Hammer. I mean, they're also responsible for films like Tomorrow at 10. Planet was a company that went under a few different names depending on what point of being slightly distracted here. Yeah, another booklet with text by Barry Forshaw. Curious cover art. Yeah, so Planet were, an interesting company. One of those companies that kind of came and went, changed their names as time went. They were more kind of a producer-based company. Probably worth a more detailed piece at some point. This is obviously just a quick look at the new releases. But yeah, I mean, if you want to hear more about the history of Planet Productions and their handful of very fascinating films, clearly I've got all the notes for it, so just let me know. On a very different note, from 88 comes Swedish porno, Blonde Animal. Before anybody gets the heebie-jeebies, I should just point out that this is not remotely a porn film. Softcore, perhaps we might say, but it's not explicit. It's a Japanese film from the early 70s. One of a handful that was shot in Sweden for some reason, presumably because Sweden was seen as the height of sexiness in the early 70s. See, it's a double disc here with the Blu-ray and a DVD. We'll talk a little bit more in some other video, I think, about the odd survival of DVD and how a lot of films are now coming out simply on that format. And as you can see, like a lot of them, the 88 Japanese films, it's coming with its own little obi strip, which you can remove just to get a kind of more minimalist cover. It's not really a double-sided cover, just an image from the film. But this is a really kind of curious film. The whole series of these Swedish shot Japanese movies is fascinating, in fact, because they're not movies in which Japanese characters go to Sweden by and large. They're just movies shot in Sweden with Swedish actors, or at least with Scandinavian actors. So I guess that the Swedish performers were somewhat exotic figures in Japan. I mean, certainly, blonde, blue-eyed Swedes don't look anything like Japanese people. So there's probably that certain fetish to be had. I've done an entire booklet about this entire curious genre and subject that is included here. No commentary, but just booklet text. I say just booklet text. I mean, it's every bit as valid. This one, yeah, it's interesting. If you're a fan of those kind of late 60s, early 70s Euro-erotic movies, then you'll certainly enjoy this one. Rather chunkier from 88 is Eyeball, the classic Umberto Lenzi giallo film. This featuring a commentary track from myself and Kim Newman, amongst many extras. And as you can see, this is, if you watched our piece on Anthropophagus and Absurd, you'll see this is very much a similar kind of package. So this solid case here, and look at that UHD. Once again, whoever would have thought it. This one comes with a collection of postcards, which I assume we can get out without damaging anything. These are presumably reproductions of original Italian lobby cards. Yeah, there we go. So I mean, how many do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, very nice. I mean, the original lobby cards, press front of house sets, press packages, whatever you want to call them, of these things were wonderful collector's items back in the day. It's nice to see them reproduced here. There's a hefty book. How many pages is this? Let's have a look. Of course, it stops numbering up after a certain point. 73, 74, 76. 80 pages. Whoever thought there'd be an 80-page book about this film, written by several different people. So a collection of essays, really nicely put together. I mean, this is the kind of thing, again, that you'd be more than happy to have as a standalone item. And then there's the free poster, which features double-sided, I assume. So, cover artwork on one side, original movie poster on the other. Obviously, I won't be putting either of these on my wall, but if I was, you can probably guess which one it would be. And equally, I think the sleeve. Let's have a look. Double-sided. Yeah. So we can use either version. I'll slip it over to the Gatti Nero in un labirinto di vetro version. Looks very nice. So 3 different pieces of artwork. I really like this cover as well, incidentally. I think it looks really good. these packages that that 88 are putting together of these films are fantastic. Like the Anthropophagus and Absurd, this one is only available from the 88 website, so I'll actually put you a link there. If you haven't seen Eyeball, it's a fantastic giallo set in Spain, following a party of tourists who get diminished one by one, yet still carry on with their holiday because, you know, well, they pay good money for it. Who wouldn't? And it has a lot of interesting elements, not least of which is that the central character is, or the final girl, if you want to look at it that way. Might be giving you a spoiler here, so watch out. But yeah, she's a black lesbian, and bear in mind that this is an early 70s movie. So having a black lesbian as your main character is quite a progressive thing, particularly as it's not remarked on at all, either race or sexuality. So yeah, really intriguing stuff. Some superb set pieces of gore, great soundtrack, fascinating plot twists. If you're into giallo, then this is a must-have. I'm sure you're aware of that already, but don't let the naysayers put you off. This is a great movie. Now for something completely different. Flesh Freaks on Saturn's Core. Saturn's Core, of course, those of you who watched our previous video about Richard Baylor's movies will be familiar with. The label that specialises in shot on video obscurities, I think we can call them, and probably doesn't come much more obscure than Flesh Freaks, which, as you can see, comes with a double cover, a quite remarkable piece of imagery there, and a arguably equally remarkable image there, as well as on the back and the front. There's no messing around with this particular film. What you're going to get here is actually a film, or a pair of films, because there's extras, from Conal Prendergast, who was a Canadian teenager who found himself around the Mayan ruins and decided, as you do, let's make a zombie movie here. As you can imagine, this is a classic bit of outsider cinema. Weird. Wonderful is maybe not the word to use. It's defiantly strange. It's very much its own thing. It doesn't follow any of the rules of mainstream cinema making. It's just very, very odd. And for those of you who like the kind of weirder side of 1980s, 1990s shot on video productions, before cameras really reached that point where everything started to take on a slightly professional sheen, even if it was really badly made, then this is absolutely, up your street. And it's certainly up my street. I'm a big fan of these kind of oddball, weirdo movies, and this is as oddball and weirdo as you get. It seems like everything that Saturn's Core touches is well worth investing in. Hopefully we'll get to look at a few more and do maybe a more in-depth study of both the label and the films that they've been releasing. In the meantime, I'll just say that, again, this is an absolute must for those of you who like your horror films to be eccentric and unusual, and anyone out there who's interested in kind of amateur filmmaking and that whole weird world of underground shot on video, barely released horror, of which there is a lot. Finally, and I think I've been given a bit of a clue here with Torre Satana to the left of me and Solid VHS to the right, we'll have a quick look at the first three titles from Severin's Russ Meyer collection. Now, I'm going to go into these in much more depth in a different video. We'll do a whole kind of Russ Meyer piece, because Meyer is one of my favourite filmmakers, somebody whose work I've been collecting, and not just as movies, but obviously, you know, merchandise and memorabilia for decades. I just love his aesthetic, and the first 3 movies, amazing that we've got these out at all, given the various stories that we were told about that we would never see these movies again. And now here they are on UHD. And the first 3 titles, it's the Vixen trilogy, Vixen, Supervixens, and Beneath the Valley of the Ultravixens, which makes sense as a threesome, though they are very different films. Vixen is Meyer's kind of late 60s breakthrough film in many ways. I mean, he'd had several breakthrough films, I suppose, up to that point. His first film, The Immoral Mr. T's, really invented the whole idea of the nudie film and was a big hit. You look at some of the later titles from the 60s, or the kind of mid 60s, things like Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, obviously, Motor Psycho, Mudhoney, Lorna, all hugely important films. Not all big hits at the time, has to be said. Faster Pussycat famously was not a box office hit when first released. But Vixen, with Erica Gavin, extraordinary in the title role, is the movie that effectively got Russ his big break. It took Russ Meyer to the Hollywood studios. Unimaginable now. This is a film that was banned in several places as obscene. It was banned in the UK, I believe, and then finally, when it was released, very heavily cut. Yet he was still hired by 20th Century Fox to make a sequel to one of their big hits, Valley of the Dolls. Beyond the Valley of the Dolls is a film that, my God, you know, so much to say about that particular film. For years now, it's been the only Russ Meyer movie really available. That and the other film he made for 20th Century Fox, The 7 Minutes, which were released some years ago by Arrow. Obviously, they weren't part of the Russ Meyer archive, they were owned by Fox. But yeah, I mean, for him to get that break and to be given the ability to make a film as wild as Beyond the Valley of the Dolls is unthinkable today. So these editions essentially reflect the artwork that Russ used on his original US releases and indeed the original UK releases, and the cover work inside is the same. There's only one side to these. They're double discs with the Blu-ray and the UHD, and I think, as if you've watched my interview with Severin's David Gregory, you'll know that essentially respecting Russ's wishes, respecting his artwork, was very much part of doing this deal. And yet these look as if Russ Meyer could have released these if he was still with us. So Vixen, as I said, is a gloriously sexually aggressive, but by modern standards not explicit, adult movie. I mean, there's a lot of nudity in it, a lot of sex. It's outrageous for its time. By the time we come on to Supervixens and then later on Beneath the Valley of the Ultravixens, these films are post the 20th Century Fox deal and after his movie Black Snake. So it's really his return to the wild world of adult filmmaking, I guess you would call it. And both of these movies take on a wildly cartoonish aspect, both in terms of sex and violence, a lot more graphic than the 60s films, as you would imagine. I mean, this is 1976, this is 1979. Meyer famously was not a fan of hardcore and shied away from moving in that direction, but he does get a lot raunchier with these particular movies and the movie Up that is coming in the next batch of Severin titles. Famously, Supervixens was again heavily cut by the BBFC. When I first saw this in the British cinema, it was almost unrecognisable. I'd already seen the VHS release, which was uncut, and yeah, it was just butchered. It was actually on a double bill, actually a triple bill with Beneath the Valley, which was also butchered, and Black Snake. The audience of the incredibly dark cinema in Manchester that I saw these films in had obviously come for boobs, and boobs are kind of lacking in Black Snake, to be fair. Certainly of the size that you would find them in these films. And there was a steady trickle of people leaving the cinema during that particular movie. But again, these are Russ Meyer stories for another day. But I will give you a sneak preview of some of the Russ Meyer material that we'll take a look at in the form of the British poster for one of these films, actually a Russ Meyer double bill. And if you can see, this is actually signed by the great man himself. I interviewed Russ Meyer a couple of times, in fact, and we're currently trying to dig out the tape of that interview so that it can be shared with the wider world. And also did an interview later on with Kitten Natividad, and let me say that they were both wonderful. I think the interviews I did with Russ, certainly the second one, was possibly one of the last that he ever did. I was told at the time that he wasn't doing interviews anymore, but for whatever reason he was happy to make an exception for me. This was shortly before his illness took over. So that's it for now. A mixed bag of movies in terms of content, but certainly not in terms of quality. We'll probably take another look at some more titles that I picked up recently. Older films that finally got around to adding to the collection. If you like this kind of waffling content, then why not subscribe to Desperate Living? There's plenty of fun stuff already on the channel and more to come. And if you like this particular video, then of course just click that like button. Everything helps us grow the channel. And let us know in the comments what you think of any of these titles or any of these personal favourites, or do you hate all of them? Fascinated to know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.